Welcome to the Heart Rate Variability Podcast. Each week we talk about heart rate variability and how it can be used to improve your overall health and wellness. Please consider the information in this podcast for your informational use and not medical advice. Please see your medical provider to apply any of the strategies outlined in this episode. Heart Rate Variability Podcast is a production of Optimal LLC and Optimal HRV. Check us out at optimalhrv.com. Please enjoy the show.
All right.
Welcome, friends, to Heart Rate Variability Podcast. I am Matt Bennett, back here with my good friend, HRV nerd, and favorite podcast guest, Dr. Ina Khazan. Dr. Ina Khazan, welcome back to the show. It's great to see you again. I'm excited to nerd out with you a little bit about low-frequency heart rate variability.
Thanks so much for having me back, Matt. Always a pleasure.
Awesome. And if you're new to the podcast, you'll also see This Week in HRV episodes hitting on Tuesday. We throw in these interviews every once in a while, but I'm excited to get back to this format as well. So we want to focus just on what is my favorite HRV biometric, and I know it's at least near and dear to your heart as well, low frequency. So, I would love to kind of slow walk us up to really understanding the power of low frequency and why we focus on it for HRV biofeedback. What's it tell us about our autonomic nervous system? But one of the things that I get and hear from people is I still don't really understand what a frequency domain is. And so let's kind of slow walk me and everybody else up to what are we talking about when we're talking about a frequency domain? A little bit more complicated, I think, for a lot of folks than maybe, hey, we're measuring over a specific period of time, which is the time domain. Let's again, slow walk up to what is a frequency domain, and then we can talk about what specifically low frequency is.
Sure thing. It is not an intuitive concept, for sure.
Which makes all of us feel a little bit better right off the bat.
Right. Okay, so your heart rate signal, we think of it as one signal, right? If we look at an EKG, there is like one line, or a medical EKG has a bunch of lines, but it's one line. So we think of it as one signal, but in reality, the heart rate signal is actually composed of a bunch of different frequencies, of a bunch of different signals, each one having a different frequency. So that you can think of as just like looking at white light, right? And if you look at white light, it looks like white light, right? And that's it. But we know that in reality, white light is composed of a bunch of different color frequencies mixed up together. So if we take a prism and look at white light, through that prism, you will see the 7 colors of the rainbow, right? So the prism would break down that white light into the blue and the orange and the purple and the yellow and the red and, et cetera, right? So even though without the prism, we just see the white light, but there is a lot more that we don't see with the naked eye.
Right.
The same thing is happening with your heart rate signal. If you just look at an EKG tracing, if you just look at the BBP tracing, which is what you're seeing on, on most of your HRV biofeedback screens, it's just one line.
Mm-hmm.
But in reality, what we don't see with the naked eye is that the heart rate signal is composed of a bunch of different signals, each one at a different frequency. And the reason that's important is because we have these ranges of frequencies that are attributed to different parts of the nervous system. We know where they come from, we know what they mean, we know how to interpret them, we know what to do with them, how to train them. Is that a good place to start?
Yeah, so I guess just to, again, keep us slow walking up to the definition. So we can take a heartbeat and separate that out. Are we breaking down different parts of the EKG? Is it like, where do these frequencies sort of come from that we're kind of getting in a, beats per minute sort of data set?
Okay, good question. So you need to have at least a minute at least a minute of data. If you have one heartbeat, that tells you absolutely nothing, right?
Right.
You need to have a bunch of consecutive heartbeats. You need to have a bunch of interbeat intervals in order to be able to determine frequencies, right? Because if a frequency is a signal that's continuously running, right? For that, you have to have enough data. So our Fast Fourier Transform algorithm, which is the one that breaks down your heart rate signal into these component frequencies, works by first gathering at least a minute's worth of data. So there's going to be a lot of interbeat intervals in that original initial data set, and that's going to keep running and analyzing minute by minute, right? So in that
Yeah.
moving a long way, it's going to start incorporating new data into it. But it's always going to be working with a bunch of data, right? Just one or two or three interbeat intervals will not tell us anything about the frequency
Okay.
of any particular signal. Okay. Um, so once we have that minute of data, then the Fast Fourier Transform can look at how is this signal showing up, and it's looking at the interbeat intervals. It's almost like building a histogram. How much of this kind of interbeat interval we have, and how many of these, and how many, right? So it's creating almost like a curve. And then, it's actually calculating area under the curve. So if you are, if you want to think back to your calculus times, if it's not giving you hives, you can, it's calculating area under the curve and looking at how much of that area is due to the high frequency signal, how much of that area is in the high frequency range, right? How much of the area is in the high frequency range, how much of the area is in the low frequency range, how much of the area under that curve is in the very low frequency range, right? And it's going to give you a number, like, I don't know, 600 milliseconds squared, right?
Yeah.
That tells you how much, like, what is the power? That 600 millisecond square is the power of that signal in that frequency range.
Okay. So we got that. And so is like we talk a lot about high frequency, low frequency. Also, there's very low frequency and ultra low frequency, and who knows what else lies out there in the universe. So what are we like talking about is are you either in high frequency or low frequency? Are you always in a little bit of high frequency and a little bit of low frequency? Like, how does all this kind of come together and what are they sort of telling us about our autonomic nervous system?
So all three of these frequency ranges are really important. Let me also add a caveat. There is an ultra low frequency, just so we're aware. We don't use it in biofeedback because that signal is so slow that it requires at least 24 hours of data to do anything with. So we're not going to get into the ultra low frequency, but it exists, just so you know. We primarily in biofeedback deal with high frequency, low frequency, very low frequency, and we need all of these, right? So when we are just walking around, going about our day, we want that signal to be mixed up and distributed among all three of these frequencies. We don't want to walk around in any one, where most of our signal is in any one of these frequencies. We want to have a healthy distribution of all. Because they're all important, they're all signals of important function of your nervous system, so we really don't want to eliminate any of them.
Gotcha.
Um, when we are purely at rest, right, just kind of, kind of chilling, with not a whole lot going on, we want to be dominant in the high frequency, which is the signal that is indicative of the vagal tone or the parasympathetic nervous system activity. So, most of our daily activities, we do want to have more high frequency power than any of the others, but we still want the other two as well, right? We don't want to eliminate them. We don't want just high frequency. We want all three to be present, and the distribution is going to fluctuate throughout the day depending on what's happening.
So high frequency, if I get this right, please correct me if I'm wrong, sort of seems to trend, and I won't, unless we can use the word, stronger than trend. I'll let you tell me that. With RMSSD and SDNN for those time domains, for the most part. So are we measuring similar things when we see like high frequency and RMSSD? I know when I look at my charts, they usually trend together. Am I correct in making that assumption?
They are generally yes.
Okay.
They're not exactly the same thing, but so high frequency power is almost exclusively the vagal nerve function, the
Okay.
parasympathetic. RMSSD, which is a time domain measure, it is considered a general measure of all autonomic nervous system functioning, but
Mhm.
it does skew towards the vagal nerve.
Okay.
So when that's why you see them trending together. Yes, RMSSD does tell us a bit more about vagal functioning than any other part of the nervous system. SDNN, for example, which is another time domain measurement, is much more general. It takes everything into consideration about equally, so it does not skew towards the vagus, it's not going to trend as much with a high frequency. But because RMSSD is skewed more towards vagal function, it will trend more with a high frequency power.
Excellent. So we got a definite working definition of high frequency. So let's move down to low frequency. So I'd love to compare and contrast the two of, what are we talking about? Because everything I've learned about heart rate variability, that vagal break, the vagal tone is really so powerful in our overall health and wellness. So when we shift to low frequency, what are we looking at there specifically?
So low frequency power is an indicator of the two main sources of heart rate variability. So at low frequency, we're looking at the baroreflex, which is
Mhm.
your autonomic nervous system's ability to regulate blood pressure, right? So it's a blood pressure regulatory system. And the vagus, right? So it's the parasympathetic influences. So when your heart rate signal is concentrated in the low frequency range, you are maximizing the activity of the two main sources of heart rate variability, the baroreflex and the vagus. Okay?
Gotcha.
Which is why we use low frequency power for biofeedback training, for
Mhm.
HRV biofeedback training, right? Because that's the frequency where we're maximizing the two main sources of HRV. This is a really good place to exercise
Yeah.
those two. They get stronger, right? So this, if you do it 20 minutes a day of breathing, shifting your signal into the low frequency range, you do that through resonance frequency breathing, right?
Mhm.
So when you do your breathing 20 minutes a day, you're exercising the two main sources of HRV. They're getting stronger. And then when you get over time, as you get back to normal breathing, your HRV starts increasing, right? So if you've been doing your 20 minutes a day of breathing for, say, 4, 6, 8 weeks, your daily HRV at normal breathing is going to start trending up because you've exercised that self-regulatory muscle. Right, so this is very much akin to going to the gym, right? When
Yeah.
you go to the gym and you lift some dumbbells and swing some kettlebells, you are do some squats and some planks, etc., whatever you're gonna do, you are strengthening your muscles, right? And then you might not notice a big change in your muscle strength after any one workout, but if you've been working out for a couple of months, you will notice that change, right? So if, after a couple of months of working out, a friend asks you to help them move a couch, you'll notice that it's a lot easier to lift that couch than it would have been a couple of months earlier, right? That's because you've been strengthening those, like your literal muscles, and now it's easier to lift heavy things. With HRV biofeedback, you're exercising the proverbial muscle. Although heart is a muscle, so technically you're also exercising a muscle, but you are exercising the primary sources of heart rate variability. So then, a couple of months down the road, when you encounter a stressful situation, you might notice that it's just easier to respond to that situation in a healthier way because your self-regulatory mechanism is better and more ready to help you do that.
I love that. So I guess, is like why then, I guess question would be, so high frequency will drop, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, during HRV biofeedback, low frequency goes up. So if high frequency is measuring vagal tone, are we through like resonance frequency breathing practice kind of pulling the vagal brake off, or why are those two things like, I would think just logically they would both kind of spike during training sections, but obviously that's not what we see happening.
Really, really good question. So the frequency range for the vagal tone is spans it's a wider range.
Mm.
It actually falls into the low frequency and then all the way into the high frequency.
Okay.
But it is also very breathing dependent, right?
Mm.
So it's not just the frequency of the vagal tone. Where that frequency lies is very much breath dependent. So when you're breathing at a normal breathing rate of, say, 11 breaths a minute or higher, most of your vagal tone is going to be reflected in the high frequency range. There's
Okay.
still going to be a little bit in the low
Yeah.
frequency, but most of it at normal breathing rate is going to be in the high frequency range. But then as you slow down your breathing, that shifts the vagal tone power into the low frequency range where the baroreflex resides as well. All right, so this
Okay.
is where you're going to exercise both of them together.
Okay. So next question is how you describe low frequency. I think the natural thing for obsessive people like myself is, well, it sounds so amazing. I should breathe in that all the time, right? Or I want to like, be in low frequency because I got all these systems synced up. Obviously, if I want big biceps, I'm not going to do curls for 24/7. But why wouldn't I want to breathe in low frequency for 2, 3 hours a day? So, like, just as an example.
Because when you are in the low, when you are shifting your breath into a resonance frequency and maximizing your low frequency power, you are greatly reducing the high frequency and the very low frequency activity. They don't disappear, but they're barely there,
Yeah.
right? And but we really do need them, right? So we don't want to suppress them for too long. So when you do 20 minutes a day or 20 minutes twice a day, if you're so motivated, um, first of all, that is sufficient. That is sufficient to train your nervous system. That is sufficient to um, give your vagal nerve that bit of extra oomph, over time to help you self-regulate better and better. And there is no need to keep doing that. You can overdo it, just like you can overdo it with exercise.
Yeah.
You can overdo it with this, right? So you don't want to be suppressing the high frequency and the very low frequency power for too long because there are other mechanisms involved here that you don't want to be eliminating um, from your everyday functioning.
And being in high frequency during, well, I don't know, performance is but let's just say at work. After this, I have to go return some emails and do some, website edits, stuff like that. That's where I really want high frequency is going to be probably where I want to be to perform at my best on task. I don't want to say performance overall because if you're in an athletic performance, I'm assuming that you're going to get more sympathetic energy. Hey, HRV is going to track. So, I want to kind of perform in high frequency with that and train at low frequency. Am I close to right with that?
Yes. So through training, so through doing your 20 minutes a day, when you maximize your low frequency, what will happen, when you are, sitting at your computer working on the website, you are going to increase your high frequency power. We do want to be careful. Most of what we get from the HRV distribution is parasympathetic. There is not a lot of actually sympathetic activity that we're capturing, especially in those shorter recordings. That may be a conversation for another time. But when you are let's say you're working on your website and then you realize that, you gotta run to the post office because it's about to close and you need to mail, a reader to somebody. Um, there you go. What you're getting is you will get a spike in the very low frequency.
Mhm.
Your high frequency will decrease. You'll get a spike in the very low frequency, and that is primarily due to vagal withdrawal,
Oh, interesting.
right? So, in order for your activity level to go up, the vagus has to take its foot off the brake.
Okay.
Right, it has to allow that activation to go up. So that's why you'll see a decrease in high frequency and increase in very low frequency. It's a vagal withdrawal.
So with normal breathing, increased low frequency is a sign of a demand on you. Stress, one way, good stress, bad stress, but you'll see that elevated low frequency when I need to get off my butt and run to the post office to mail a reader or something like that. That's we're getting. I don't know. Does the like brake going off? I know the sympathetic's just there, so sympathetic activation's the wrong way to use, but you get more of that sympathetic energy as measured by low frequency when you're not doing resonance frequency breathing.
Well, so low frequency does not measure sympathetic activity at all. I know
Okay.
this is the really confusing part.
Yes.
It's also contradictory. Like what you'll find in the literature is, up until maybe like 10 years ago, literature predominantly considered low frequency to be a balance between sympathetic and parasympathetic.
Mhm.
All right, so if you're reading older research, you're going to see that everywhere.
Or three
Um,
articles I read last week that are still kind of getting it wrong.
Well, yeah, so that's the thing. Yes. So a lot of the newer research is still citing the older research,
Yeah.
right? Or the older articles. What we know, in the last 10, 12 years, and there's a number of papers on this, so I'm quite convinced
Yes.
that low frequency has no sympathetic input at all. It is the baroreflex and parasympathetic, and that's it. So what you might be seeing, is if you are more activated, right? You may not be seeing sympathetic activation, but you're seeing activation. So if low frequency goes up in these situations, it's simply happening because you're getting vagal withdrawal, right? So vagal
Mhm.
engagement decreases, so your high frequency is going to go down.
Yeah.
And your very low frequency might go up just a bit, might not be going up a ton.
Right.
And it just because those two, because the vagal withdrawal is happening, so high frequency is decreasing. You'll just see the low frequency rising because high frequency is decreasing.
Interesting. Okay.
Right. So
Okay.
I would be careful in interpreting low frequency at normal breathing. The fact that low frequency might be higher at normal breathing may not be a problem in and of itself. It's just that it usually happens because high frequency is low, and that may be a
Okay.
problem.
Okay. So that makes a lot of sense. So just that the high frequency is less dominant in a way. So we'll see maybe an increase in low frequency, but a different sort of increase than we see during resonance frequency, intentional increasing of low frequency.
Exactly, exactly. So breathing rate matters, the context matters. Plus, a lot of our displays are percentage based, right? So if you
Yes.
have less if your vagus is withdrawing, if it's taking its foot off the brake to allow more activation to go up, like to allow activation to go up, percentage wise, you're going to have a lot less high frequency.
Makes
So
sense.
low frequency becomes higher percentage wise. It may not even be changing much. It's just
Yeah.
now taking up more of the space because less of that area under the curve is due to high frequency. So your low frequency percentage is going to go up.
Going to go up. And that's
It,
where like you'll see low frequency slash high frequency as a now outdated metric that you still see peaking
Yeah,
out.
the LFHF ratio is problematic.
Okay.
It does not tell us what we used to think it tells us, right? It does not, it's not a sympathovagal balance measure that we used to think it is. Um,
Okay, that because you still see that. Like I said, I think I saw three articles last week. So that still is, sort of an artifact of the field, so to speak. Because yeah, you Google it and that becomes, ChatGPT wants to throw it in everything as well. I find, which is an interesting phenomena that I'd say us HRV nerds need to be careful about if we're using AI, because AI loves that ratio for whatever reason.
it's sometimes it's the only, some papers report only on that ratio. It's the
Yes.
only HRV variable they're looking at, which is very sad. Yeah.
So real quick, because I got a couple questions I want to make sure we get to. Anything we need to say about very low frequency in this? I see it as kind of like the third stepchild. We don't really care that much about it, but do we need to care about it? Is it telling us anything?
It is actually very important. Uh, in our short-term biofeedback recordings, it doesn't tell us a ton only because very low frequency means it's slow.
Yeah,
So if we have a short-term recording, we're not getting a ton of data.
yeah,
Doesn't mean it's not important, especially if somebody's getting like a 24-hour recording, if they are wearing a Holter monitor, if their
yeah.
cardiologist is monitoring, right? That very low frequency measurements are very important. We want them there. We need them there. If they're suppressed, it's a problem, right? It's like,
Yeah.
we do need to have some very low frequency. We don't want to be very low frequency dominant, well,
Right.
for long periods of time. But we do need a healthy, very low frequency. In a normal state, very low frequency is going to be the lowest of the three power-wise, right? And
Yeah.
just in
Okay.
daily activities. But
Gotcha.
we do need it. It's there for a good reason. Now, the reason we don't attend to it as much in biofeedback is because, again, our recordings are short.
Sure.
We don't
Yeah.
see it as much. But fluctuations in very low frequency can be meaningful moment to moment. When we get vagal withdrawal,
Hmm.
that's going to manifest in increase in very low frequency, right? So the
Okay.
vagal nerve taking its foot off the brake, allowing activation to go up, right? So when that's happening in a healthy way, right? Let's say you suddenly realize you need to run to that post office, right?
Yeah.
Hurry, 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 hurry. The vagal nerve needs to quickly take its foot off the brake and allow activation to go up so you can make
Yeah.
it. So you'll see a decrease in high frequency and a rise in very low frequency, and that's good and healthy, and that's how it should be. If, on the other hand, at rest, that's what's happening, the high frequency power is low and very low frequency power is high, and that's at rest. When they're not doing anything in particular, that's a problem. That means that the vagus is not strong enough to regulate on a
Mm.
daily basis, right?
Yeah.
That may mean, it's not a diagnostic tool, but I do see this frequently with folks who have chronic anxiety, chronic pain, things like that.
Mm.
Be careful, this is not a diagnostic tool. I'm
Right.
just talking about correlations and associations. But that's not a healthy state to be in all the time.
Great. All right, so a couple questions to wrap us up here. And these are a little bit more optimal HRV specific, but they're questions we get from users sometimes. So we've got the optimal zone scale, which, as I tell people, and again, correct me here, I think I'm aligned with everything we've said. It's out of the last 60 seconds, how many of those, what percentage of time did you spend low frequency dominant? I think I'm using the word dominant there, but in low frequency with that. And so it gives you a really great scale, and it's been just a game changer. Like, as I like to say, using your gym analogy, that low frequency scale is like not only just going to the gym, but doing it on steroids, because I feel like I'm just
Healthy steroids.
healthy steroids. Yes, the kind with no side effects. Maybe creatine is a better example because
There you
everyone
go.
uses
Yes.
creatine nowadays. But sometimes there's a phenomenon that I know I'm not the only one that's seen is one, is there any relationship between low frequency and max min? Because it's another number that we give post biofeedback session, and sometimes we'll see our max min numbers maybe even be below the average where we've spent almost all of our time in low frequency during the practice. So are those two connected in any way? Like I find when I really give a good exhale, I can see max min coming up, but it sometimes doesn't really impact my ability to stay in, optimal zone or low frequency during the practice.
They are related, but it's not a one-to-one correlation as you just
Yeah.
described. So max min is very strongly vagally influenced.
Okay.
They're not baroreflex, it's vagal. So it is a very good indicator of being in your resonance frequency breathing rate. It is a very good indicator of are you training your vagus to get stronger.
Yeah.
So that's why we do look at max min during HRV biofeedback exercises. Now, you might sometimes see this discrepancy where your optimal zone, meaning that your low frequency power is 80% of your heart rate signal or
Mhm.
more, right? So it's not just dominant, but like really dominant, right?
Yeah.
80% of your heart rate signal or more is in the low frequency range. Um, but max min is a little lower than typical. That's happening because we're looking at low frequency in that situation as percentage.
Okay.
Uh, what you will see much better correlation with is absolute power of low frequency and max min. Right, so max min is
Yes.
not percentage wise, percentage base is just a number. On a day, let's say you're having a day when your HRV is just a little lower. You didn't
Mhm.
sleep as well, you're jet lagged, you have a ton going on. Your HRV is generally just a little lower. Um, so your absolute numbers during your biofeedback training are going to be lower. So your total power of low frequency, absolute power of low frequency is going to be lower, max min is going to be lower than typical.
Yeah.
They'll still go up compared to where you are at baseline that day, right?
Yeah.
But they'll be lower than typical. But percentage wise, you can spend, you can be 100% in the optimal zone. That's because you're looking at percentages, not absolute numbers. Does that make
Okay,
sense?
that because that was my second question is I do see the max min number and the total low frequency, that big number we give, those trend together. I'm not going to say perfectly because I'd have to do a lot of math to come to that conclusion, but that I can have a really, and it's for me, and maybe again we have to always, this could just be a math thing. Like when I'm tired, but I still can have enough focus to get into low, like 80% of my time in, the optimal zone. I can see my total power, low frequency, my max min actually be lower than my average. So that would explain both those phenomena that people often can confuse people because, well, why am I above my average for optimal zone time, but below my average for these two things? And that's, we're just measuring kind of different aspects. And ideally, I guess we'd want to be above our average on all three, but still getting that time in training in optimal zone, is the best thing to pay attention to.
Exactly, right? So the optimal zone just tells you kind of like about the efficiency of your practice, right?
Yes.
And you can be very efficient on days when you have very high HRV, so
Yeah.
your low frequency and max min are going to be high during training, just like you had high RMSSD in the morning, you're likely to have higher low frequency and max min during your training times. And you can have very high optimal zone, or maybe not, right? You might have high RMSSD in the morning, and so your HRV is doing well. So you'll have higher than typical low frequency and max min, but your optimal zone may not be as high because you might be just a little bit distracted during that time.
Yeah.
Right? That's possible too. So they are measuring slightly different aspects, and that's why we give you, all of that information because it's important and gives you slightly different information. On the days when you're waking up with lower RMSSD, your low frequency and max min might be lower than typical during a training, but you might be able to get really focused and really into the training and be at a very high optimal zone.
I can't believe you ran this master class in a half hour. So, my friend, thank you so much. I've been on like a 5-year journey to fully understand this. So I will listen to this episode probably 20 times to get some of your wisdom into these synapses in my own head. But I appreciate this because I think, a lot of times we'll just throw around heart rate variability and we can get in trouble if we don't know what we're really talking about. And, I think part of the struggle is we really have to have these conversations to understand what these metrics and what these numbers are really telling us. And I just appreciate you to, I think, answer a lot of questions. Not only the users of Optimal HRV have, but one of the things I try to get a lot is what is low frequency? And, it is, I get to sit at the feet of some of the most brilliant people in this field. And it's still a really complicated thing to come to an answer to. So I thank you for your time today and walking us through this and, helping us all, interpret our scores and get the most out of our biofeedback practice.
Always a pleasure to talk about this. It's fun.
And as always, you can find show notes and everything else at optimalhrv.com. And again, if you haven't listened to the This Week in HRV episodes, highly encourage you to do so. It has been we do a deep dive into research and news around heart rate variability. And I think you'll enjoy it as much as I do. So everybody have a great week. Ina, thanks so much. Always a pleasure, my friend.